Okay, now we're going to go over what spread means if we're a net investor. Okay. So if we're a net investor. Now here's the interesting thing about this decomposition. If the company's a net investor, again, let's just remember, what does that mean? That means that they have more investments on their balance sheet than they have debt. That means when we calculate FLEV, NNO is negative, so FLEV will be a negative number. Okay, financial leverage will be a negative number. Now, what's interesting is if they're a net investor, the calculation for spread is identical. I don't need to change anything here on the board. Okay, this is the same calculation. But what spread means is entirely different if they're a net investor. Here's how we think about it. If they're a net investor, NNE, what that'll mean is in here, NNE would be a negative number because they'll have more investment income on average. They'll have more investment income than they will interest expense. So you'll have, whatever value goes in here will have a negative sign, generally have a negative sign in front of it. And down here, which is average NNO, well, if you're a net investor, your NNO is also negative because you have more investments than debt. So the denominator will have a negative sign. And because it's a negative in the numerator and a negative denominator, when the math is done, when you do the division, those two negatives create a positive. So spread will have some return on their net operating assets minus some other percentage here. Okay. Now, for a net borrower, what that percentage represented was kind of their net interest expense. Well, if they're a net investor, it means something different. What we have in here is their return on their investments. Okay? It's their return, whatever return they're getting. If they're a net investor, they've invested in assets, and maybe they're getting 2, 3, 4%. Okay? So in the case of a net investor, what we have in here, it's not their interest, sort of their cost of borrowing. Rather, it's their return on investing. Well, if that's the case, what does spread then mean? Well, here we need a little bit of background. If you're a company that's a net investor, you're Microsoft. They've 60% of their balance sheet's investments. When they earn $1, they have a choice of what to do with that dollar. They sell software and they have a buck. They can either put it into operations and earn this return on net operating assets, or they can take that dollar and keep it liquid and put it in a financial security. If they put it in a financial security, they will earn this investment return that's in here. Okay. Now, typically, a company's operating return, Microsoft's return on net operating assets is going to be 30, 35%. So most companies, their return on net operating assets is a return much bigger than what they would get just investing in their securities. The return in here for most companies would be something like what, 3, 4, maybe 5%. So what that means is when a company like Microsoft has $1, when they decide to put it into a security instead of into operations, they're actually sacrificing some returns for the sake of liquidity. They want to stay liquid to make acquisitions and do other things. So what spread means for a net investor is it's kind of the cost of staying financially liquid. If they make 30%, well, maybe that's too high. Let's say they make 20% on operations. Or they can make 6% in the market, just with some of their investments. Well, that difference, 20 minus 6 of 14, that 14% is how much they lose. It's kind of an opportunity cost. It's how much they lose every time they invest $1 into a security instead of into their own business. So in this sense, for a net investor, spread could kind of be viewed as sort of what's a cost? It's an opportunity cost. It's how much they sacrifice every time they put $1 into a liquid security instead of into operations. Now you may ask yourself, why would they ever do that? Why would you ever put $1 into a liquid, into a 3% financial asset that's going to give you 3%, instead of your business that can make you 20, 30%? Well, they do it to remain financially flexible. In some industries, you have to keep liquid resources on hand to pivot quickly, to make decisions, to invest quickly, to acquire a company, you know. And so there's a trade-off there. Now, back to where we started here. Our non-operating return. When you multiply FLEV in spread, that together, that is your non-operating return. FLEV, again, is how much they've borrowed, if they're a borrower, or it's how much they've invested, if they're an investor. And spread is how well they've borrowed, if they're a borrower, or what they're sacrificing in returns, if they're an investor. Now, in the case of a borrower, generally, FLEV is positive, and our spread is positive. So we have two positive numbers. So leverage increases, you know, we have a positive number here, so leverage increases our return on equity. You know, that's what we lever, is to sort of increase the return we can give to our equity holders. If they're a net investor, FLEV is going to be negative. Okay? Spread is still generally positive, so when we have a negative times a positive, for a net investor, this non-operating return tends to be a negative number that weighs down our return on equity when you add it to the operating return. And again, that's because with net investors, they're sacrificing some returns, right? So that they can stay financially liquid. Okay. FLEV and spread. Okay, one more thing to do.